Can you see the time okay?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
All right, maybe. $14 billion worth of the United States workforce is under threat and dying in record numbers. In December 2006, Diane Fox-Koster and Dennis Van Engelsdorf, entomologists at Penn State, discovered a phenomenon which could explain this threat. Today in my presentation, I will explain the phenomenon known as CCD and how it will have a detrimental impact not only on the colonies that experience it, but also on California's agriculture and demand for such items. I will prove this to you by showing you how CCD is happening in California, how California is dependent on honeybee pollination, and how this will create a spike in prices due to a lack of cross-pollination from these creatures. First off, I'll start by explaining CCD. CCD is a condition in which more than half of the hive's worker bee population disappears. A hive is unable to maintain itself and therefore is left to ruin. This occurrence is happening in upwards of 25% of California's honeybees. Unsustainable numbers. Beekeepers, such as John Miller, state having to build more and more colonies just to maintain the growing number of necessary bees. In my second statement, California is dependent on honeybee pollination. This process is tremendously difficult to do by hand, which is why we enlist the numbers of so many bees. In fact, in nearly every year, almost all of migratory colonies are brought to California to pollinate almond trees. Every February, Dan Cummings of Capiary Farms is the owner of one of these farms, and let me start that over, I'm sorry. Dan Cummings brings over 40% of all migratory colonies to California to pollinate the almond trees. Also, I'm going to explain how it will create a spike in prices due to the lack of cross-pollination. With less availability of these fruits and vegetables, which are created through pollination of honeybees, there will not be as many fruits and vegetables for people to purchase. Unfortunately, according to a common law of supply and demand, when the demand remains unchanged but supply decreases, a shortage occurs, causing prices to rise. In conclusion, I've proven to you that CCD is actually happening in California, that California is dependent on these honeybees to produce each of these agricultural products, and that this will create a spike in the amount of produce that's created. Thank you.
All right, Heather, I think the definition of CCD ought to be your attention device so that people know what's coming up when you give the proposition. Once you get to the proposition, that's relatively clear. You lay out the structure of the speech in a way that is pretty effective, except when you get to the body of the speech, you're rushing through those points very quickly, and your proof on the individual points is kind of thin. I need some data that shows that there's an insufficient number of colonies to import to do the pollination. You basically said that 41% come in for the almond trees. What about the other nearly 60% of bee colonies out there? Couldn't they be brought in temporarily? Couldn't they rotate them in a different level? I'm not exactly sure that the first step in the chain that you're presenting has been identified. The importance of pollination is explained. I think proven it's a little bit thin. Part of that is problematic because your delivery got a little bit lost in your own argument there. And part of it is because I think that you're assuming that people are going to follow that chain of thought without necessarily giving us the data to support it as clearly. You're doing way too much reading, and you're in a hurry to finish. I appreciate you're trying to get done quickly, but you've got plenty of time to explain the argument, I think, a little bit more effectively. All right, thank you.